About 3 centuries ago, this nation was ruled by the British monarchy, steeped in extracting excessive returns, or rather rents, from every subject under its control. The monopolies granted by the monarchy were so absolute that their tentacles extended to every aspect of people's lives and dominated every aspect of liberty, commerce, and society. Nearly all paid rent to landowners, and it was the landowners that separated rulers from the ruled, with devastating results for more than a century for the most. Along the way, the antitrust laws have been created and then modified and further modified to protect people and democratically elected governments. However, one aspect of the law has always prevailed, proving the consumer harm through excessive price. But how do you regulate monopolies where consumers pay little or nothing at all, and consumers are happy to use their products? Now we are witnessing a rise of another kind of monopoly or monopolies, monopoly of data enjoyed by Facebook, Google, Twitter, Amazon, Uber, and others, but very few. These platform operators offer many useful products for free and have also become so powerful that their powers rival many governments. These platforms track every aspect of our lives, including what we consume and what we connect or who we connect with. The ever-present data monopolies in our cell phones or on our computers digitize every action we take, every decision we make, and every communication we participate in. These granular data elements are then pieced together to create individual profiles of billions of people, not millions, billions of people. When analyzed using advanced technology, these data streams and points offer deeper insights in our lives, families, preferences, finances, and also in our vulnerabilities. Moreover, these profiles and insights are for sale for anyone who pays to advertise on these so-called neutral platforms, and they target us, yes, to nearly everyone. Extreme political parties, foreign governments, or even fake robots can get this. With few $1,000s, anyone has the ability to target large or small audiences with the message of their desire and influence our actions and decisions. With the help of recommendation engines that these platform operators have, these processes is even more amplified and even more perfected. And this is all legal. There are no checks and balances from the governments at any level. In fact, many layers of government rely on this data and profiles for their own actions, leading to rise of surveillance capitalism. While many regard these sophisticated platforms as just a provider of technological solutions and regard them as neutral, many see no harm and believe that these platforms are just natural monopolies through market preferences and network effect, and make accessible information we all search for, products we want, or people we want to connect with. These data monopolies are growing so exponentially while tracking billions of users and collecting a steady stream of data. Have these monopolies grown so big that they are no good for the societies, or they are just another rich and powerful monopoly? To shed more light on this topic, we have with us Maelle Gavet, a tech insider with a view from the top at many tech companies, including in Russia, based largest e-commerce platform Ozon.ru, Priceline.com, and the largest independent real estate brokerage company Compass. With distinguished academic background from France and career spanning the globe, Gavet has spent her working life in many countries including Russia, China, and India, and now resides in New York. Welcome to Redara.
Thank you for having me.
Fascinating book. It touches on many issues, but let's drill down systematically so we can get to the core of the book and also find if there are any solutions. Who are these big companies and why they have become so big?
So in the book, I mainly focus on what I call big tech, or what people usually call big tech. So these are companies which have reached the $1 billion plus valuation, sometimes many more times. A lot of them now are actually $1 trillion company. These are companies which rely heavily on software, either because they are entirely software based. So if you look at companies like Facebook or Google, really what they sell are digital services and digital products. There is no physical component to their services, but it's also, for some of them, while the software is very important, there is a physical component. So if you think about Amazon, for example, or if you think about Apple, which sells phones to you. So it's really, these massive companies which have reached unheard of valuations, mainly through the network effect that software allows them to benefit from.
And these companies also have a global presence in the world of digital life that we all live in. They not only dominate here in the United States or Western Europe, but they have global footprint in virtually almost all the countries.
Absolutely. Again, if they are purely digital, what you just said is entirely true. Like if you're Facebook or Google, you will very easily scale around the world as long as local governments allow you to do that. So it's a little different, for example, in China. But generally speaking, assuming the local legislation doesn't stop you to do it, yes, you will scale very easily. Other companies will probably be a little more picky, like if you're Amazon, because you need a set of warehouses, you won't expand around the entire world. You will be mainly focused on a few important countries. So the US would be one, France, the UK, Germany, etc. It doesn't mean that you don't deliver to other countries, but usually your activities are a little more focused.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You bring a very fine point that we have been around with big banks or big tobacco or big food or big retail companies, but being big in the digital world is very different. How is it so?
So it is indeed very different for a few reasons. I would say first, the scale effect is very different. We've already briefly touched upon it, which is you used to be a big company, you used to need a lot of physical assets. So if you want to be a big oil company, you have to have a pretty substantial infrastructure, not just to extract the oil, but also to deliver it or to move it around the world. And then usually, especially in a lot of vertically integrated companies, you also have the last mile. So it goes all the way to the gas station. And it is very different for tech companies. There is no infrastructure. I mean, the infrastructure we're talking about are data warehouses that can pretty much be located anywhere in the world. Again, there are some local legal constraints sometimes that forces you to have a data center in the country. But generally speaking, you are very, very detached from the laws of physics that apply to every other company out there, which means that it's a lot easier to scale for you. So that's number one. Number two, the cost of adding a user is almost zero. And that's, again, is very different from a traditional company. So if you are, again, an oil company, every time you add a buyer to your business, every time you want to deliver your oil to a new country or a new gas station, like it costs you money. Like you have to figure out how to build the infrastructure to ensure the delivery, or even if you don't have to build the infrastructure, you still have to pay for the cost of delivery. And obviously I'm really, really simplifying, but I hope you get the idea. If you're a tech company, it costs nothing to Facebook or Google or Uber to add one more user. Whether they have 1 billion or 2 billion users, it just really doesn't change anything for them. And that is a tremendous advantage because you don't have any constraints in terms of growth, or you don't have the same type of constraint. Again, you have some, like your data center will need to grow a little bit, but it's really marginal compared to what a traditional business would do. And then the last thing, and obviously there's way more, but I'm trying to concentrate on the most important ones. The last thing, which is, by the way, at the core of a lot of antitrust conversations, which are ongoing right now, especially in the US, with the recent hearing and the House subcommittee, the House Antitrust Subcommittee, which released their report a few days ago, is the fact that traditionally industry will create monopoly, or let's call them strong market shares, in one specific industry. And you would get the network effect within that specific industry, and branching out while possible. So branching out into other industry while possible will not really benefit you from a scale perspective. The only exception would be the vertical integration. So like if you integrate into the full value chain, then yes, you will see a lot of or some network effect or some scale effect. But otherwise, like if you are, again, in the oil industry and you suddenly decide that you want to go into the food business, there's going to be very little synergies and very little scale effect. This is very different for big tech because every business they're entering gives them more access to what they really care about, which is data. So if you're Amazon and you are traditionally an online retailer, when you enter, for example, the domestic surveillance industry with Ring, or the camera system and the electronic key system that allows basically to ensure that your home is safe, or when you enter the voice area with Alexa, basically what you do is you're getting deeper and deeper into the day-to-day life of people, of your customers, from very different angles. And then you start being able, you connect all of that, and you start having an unbelievable amount of data that you then used across your different businesses to be able to customize the recommendations that you make to these users. And so for the first time in mankind history, we do have an industry which doesn't have any limit in terms of the industry that they want to go into. They are going after every single one of them one by one because from their business model perspective, it actually makes a lot of sense.
And as more products have electronic components or IoT component, it just gives them more access points and more data points to collect.
Exactly.
You have a very interesting, in the beginning of the book, you mentioned that these companies started out with some very noble ideas, and along the way, their hurry or the ecosystem that pushes them into get big, fast, hyper-growth mode creates all kinds of unwanted decision making, which leads to some very questionable practice sometimes, and also has a lack of understanding or a lose of focus of who the customer is, what his or her needs are, and what implications it has for the wider society. Sketch a little bit arc on it, that how or incentive system that we have created for these tech companies to become successful distorts their mission or original focus.
Yes, so when I started writing the book, one of the things that I wanted to address was the very black and white description of tech made by the media in general. And what I mean by black and white is they are describing tech either as being an amazing, transformative, only positive kind of things, or the exact opposite, like these people are evil, everything is wrong, the world is coming to an end because of them, forget freedom of speech and privacy, like this is all, the end of world is really like you can almost touch it. And every time I was reading these articles or these books, my reaction was, wait a minute, this is, maybe I'm biased because a lot of these people are my friends, and I assure you, they're not evil. They may sometimes do things that I'm concerned about, I'm not happy about. I think they're dangerous things, but they don't wake up in the morning thinking, oh, I'm going to destroy the world today. They wake up in the morning thinking, I really want to make the world a better place. And so I spent about half of the book trying to analyze why we ended up where we are right now, which is really a crossroad where I think when you look at all the effects of tech, I think we were largely in a net positive balance until a few years ago. Like, in other words, I think tech had really brought a lot of innovation and a lot of improvement to the world. And I think now we're about to enter what I would call the net negative territory, where the negative impact of tech everybody talks about it, be misinformation, election meddling, undermining of democracy, weakening of or labor conditions, and of privacy. I mean, you name it, you have it. And I think because of all of that, we're starting to enter a phase where more and more people are saying, wait a minute, this is actually much more negative, or this has a much more negative influence than I expected it to have. And more people are saying, I actually think that maybe tech overall should be stopped or should be regulated. And the whole thesis of the book is, I don't think we need less tech. We need more empathetic tech. We need more human-centered tech. And here's how we're going to do. The second half of the book is basically about the solutions, stakeholder by stakeholder. So to come back to your question, as I was going through, how did we get there? I started thinking about what is the ecosystem that has allowed this to emerge. Because too often I see what I call a finger-pointing exercise, where people, government, regulator, the media, the users are just pointing finger at one or two people, usually the founder, and say, oh, it's usually a he, there's a few she, but that's unfortunately very often the exception. He's just an evil person. And if only it wasn't for him, then the company would be so much better and we would solve problem. And so the names vary, but like Mark Zuckerberg usually makes the top of the list. Adam Newman from WeWork had his own time on the top of the list. Travis Kalanick from Uber, same thing. And every time I was like, okay, well, these people are not saints, and there are a lot of things that should be discussed with them, but this is not just them. It's an overall system that we built, and I include myself into it because I've been working in tech for 15 years now. It's an overall system that we built. So it comes down to a few things. And again, I'm simplifying because it's hard to summarize an entire ecosystem in a few bullet points, but it starts with this idea that you mentioned, that hypergrowth is kind of a North Star. So you have to grow at all costs. And it's not every company under the sun follow that North Star, but a lot of them are. And a lot of investors are, because a lot of these companies are funded by venture capitalists. And for the venture capitalist model to work, you have to deliver pretty significant growth. And employees are being incentivized through the compensation system, which is usually in tech very heavily skewed towards stock options. So the valuation of the company matters a lot. And the valuation itself depends a lot on the growth. So again, the media don't love anything more than a hypergrowth story. So again, you will be put on a pedestal if you can talk about your 3-digit growth and the amazing last fundraising that you did, which has to be at least with 80 to now make some kind of headlines. Less than 100 million, usually nobody cares anymore, at least not to the point where it actually gets any kind of media coverage. And so you put all of that together, and then suddenly there's this massive incentive to grow as fast as you can and at almost all costs. And what that means is that you are going to cut corner, because you can't grow at all costs and be super thoughtful about every single detail. You can't go through a 3-digit growth and pause to figure out whether what you're doing, what you're releasing into the world, is actually good for the world in the long term, because you're very, very focused on the short term. You've got to deliver the 3-digit or at least 2-digit, north of 50% growth that you promised to your investors, to your employees, to the media, and frankly to yourself at some point. So I think that's one big factor. I think there's another really big factor, which is around what I would call the cultural insularity and the strong tribal myth that Silicon Valley in particular, but tech in general, has been built upon. I'll start by saying this has made these companies very successful. This myth made this company able to go through walls. And so they're not all negative, but like everything in life, I guess, there is, to every positive, there is a negative. So let me elaborate a little bit. When I talk about the myth, I'm talking about things like the Steve Jobs syndrome. So this idea that you have to be a jerk to be a genius. I've encountered that so many times where I've been told that being nice was a sin, that if you're too nice, you won't be able to grow fast. If you're too nice, you're going to be spending too much time trying to make people happy rather than actually grow your business. And I've been arguing back that I think the Steve Jobs syndrome should be rephrased as you can be a genius despite being a jerk. You don't have to be a jerk to be a genius. I actually don't see the correlation whatsoever. But there is only one of them. There are plenty of others which have really nurtured this tech industry. Things like technology is neutral. Like you can put more and more technology and it will just always bring you to some kind of magical solution and it will be neutral. Forgetting that technology, the code is being built by humans and we put our bias into every single line of code that we're producing. Myths like we're meritocracy. Every person who raises to the top has done it on their own willpower and hard work. And while this is largely true, I always reply to this kind of comment by saying, so it's really fascinating to me because it looks like only white and Asian male, usually between the age of 25 and 40, have the willpower and the work ethic to make it to the top. What happened to everybody else? Are you saying that they have no willpower and no work ethic? Like, what happened to all the women? What happened to all the people of colors? Like what's wrong with them? And so, again, all these myths, which created this very strong culture, have led to a culture that has probably less empathy that it should have. And then you add on top of that the lack of diversity that I've just briefly talked about, and you add on top of that the lack of accountability, because for a really long time regulators and citizens and consumers were just in awe of all the wonderful things that these tech companies were doing, and so we kind of gave them a blank check and told them go and make the world a better place. And we didn't really have a lot of conversation about hey, wait a minute, we also need you to obey by or to follow the values that we as a society believe in. We need you to make sure that you don't harm or undermine the values that we have, the vision of society that we have. And so all of that combined created a highly innovative, high-speed, high-growth industry, which has totally changed pretty much all aspects of our life, very often in a positive way, but has also created a massive amount of negative effects that we're just starting to uncover and that unfortunately are not at all right now properly addressed.
As you explained, with the rapid growth comes rapid rearrangement of priorities, and the customer or the user or the consumer that you have designed all these systems in place is easily forgotten. With some devastating impact, you do go through some of those issues, as how some people have faced the hate crime situation or have been victims of identity crisis as well, or identity fraud victims. And there are a number of cases with no recourse. Nobody can call Google. No one can reach Facebook. And these, in fact, most users sometimes reach a wall. Those negative externalities are building up pretty rapidly for these companies. Yet we rely on their goods and services, and we conduct our daily lives using their products. So it has become a very tricky situation for the users, but these companies are just enforcing more and more code-based solutions on the user and hope that users will just love it or live with it. You bring up a very interesting example of Avaz, which was an organization that was based in Europe, that is based still in Europe, and is doing actually the work that Facebook should have been doing with only less than 30 people. Tell us more about it.
Yes, it's one of the most interesting things that I discovered, and maybe a lot of people knew about it, but I didn't. And so when I started talking to them, I realized how critical the work that they were doing was, and how surprising it was that they were the one doing it rather than Facebook. So thanks for actually bringing that up. So Avaz is an organization that basically looks at the way the social media, they spend a lot of time on Facebook in particular, how content is being published on this website, and they did a research. I think it was in 2019. They launched a Europe-wide investigation about Facebook and how the far-right network leveraged Facebook to push anti-EU propaganda. And what they discovered was amazing, and not in a good way, unfortunately. They found that a very organized set of let's call them far-right and anti-EU groups, managed to weaponize Facebook, and at a scale that had never been heard or seen before. And they gathered an estimated 762 million views over the 3 months in advance of the election, the European election in May 2019. 762 million views in 3 months of content that, as you can imagine, was very clearly anti-EU, was filled with misinformation and lies. They did the same thing again for the Brazilian election, which was a little earlier in October 2018. And same thing, they figured out that they were a very organized group of extremist political groups that use social media and Facebook in particular to share fake news and really mess up with people's understanding of the truth and of what is really happening, to push them towards much more extreme opinion. And then they did it again for Italy, looking at how things happen specifically in that country. And then they did it again for the US. And so every time they would be looking at this, they would find these unbelievable networks that are operating super professionally to push, again, basically misinformation, radicalized content. And in my book, I basically give a bunch of numbers just to give readers an understanding of the scale of what we're talking about. This is not like a little page run by one person that reaches 500 people. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of views.
And the central story here is that Facebook all along have been publicly saying that we have cleaned up our act, we are doing a very good job in monitoring and removing these people, and yet all these networks exist in their own place. And sometimes the recommendation engines even amplify their message, as you bring it up regarding YouTube for Alex Jones, 15 billion times. Tell us more about that.
Yes, this to me was one of the most shocking number. I'm glad you picked up on that. It was an ex-YouTube recommendation engineer himself. His name is Guillaume Chalot, and he basically went public and say that Alex Jones, which is known to be a conspiracy theorist, and who has since been banned from mainstream platforms, including Apple, Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify, but at the time it was still very, very well broadcasted, was recommended. So Guillaume explained that Alex Jones was recommended on YouTube 15 billion times. And the reason why this happened, it's not because YouTube management likes Alex Jones. It's worse than that, because that actually, if that was the case, you could much more easily address next steps and how do we make it so that a conspiracy theorist doesn't get 15 billion views. What happens is that YouTube recommendation algorithm, which by the way is very similar to Facebook recommendation algorithm or Twitter recommendation algorithm. So it's I'm not singling out YouTube, but it's just a really good example to explain how it works. So the YouTube recommendation algorithm basically is optimized to surface the content that creates the more views, the more posts, the more likes, the more shares. And the way the system is entirely built leads to exploiting one of our human weaknesses, which is we tend to be much more excited, and I use the word excited in a neutral sense, excited positively or negatively, so having strong emotions basically, by content which is emotional. So outrage is one of the best driver of human emotions. And all these algorithms, basically what they do is that in a neutral way, in the sense of they don't read the content and love the content and decide like, oh, we're going to share that. All they see is that they see a piece of content that somehow creates a lot of emotion, a lot of excitement from their users. Again, it's usually mainly outrage driven. And so they start promoting that content to more people because they're like, oh, if I put that in front of you, then you're going to react. And so they exploit that weakness that we all have, or most of us have, which is like we get attracted by this crazy headline and this really emotional theory. And again, all this outrage and emotion that goes there. And so we can't stop ourselves. We have to comment and repost and retweet and share and talk about it all the time. And that's the problem. And so that's how you end up with Alex Jones recommended 15 billion times on YouTube.
And that goes to the heart of the construction and operation of the recommendation engine. The recommendation engine is designed not for what they think you should watch, but it's something that you just cannot live without watching it. And that is their purpose. And they are protected by the Section 230. Go ahead.
Yeah, so you made a comment earlier that I just wanted to address before I comment on Section 230. It is absolutely true, and we should give them some credit for that. It is absolutely true that all social networks have, in one way or another, tried to address that problem. They put teams together to filter content in one way or another. They built more technology to focus on moderation. And so they're doing things. The problem is, one, it's too little too late. It took them a really, really long time to realize what was happening. And I feel like we haven't heard enough the word sorry. And that brings me to my second point, which is it would be okay, at least it's my opinion, not everybody would agree, but for me, it would be okay for these social media platforms to come out and say, look, we're working on it. We're trying, but it's still sometimes like a game of whack-a-mole. And like, we're just cutting here and cutting there, and then they just reappear. And here are the 20 things that we're going to do next month to continue to fight that problem. Instead, what we constantly hear is, oh, we have everything under control. Like, it's difficult, but we have everything under control. And that, to me, is such a lie. And I think that the problem is I don't think this is a problem that these companies are going to be able to solve on their own. I think this requires a much more in-depth societal conversation about what we need to do. And it's not by hiding the fact that this is a growing problem and by hiding the fact that they don't have things under control, that we're going to get to the solution. And that leads me to my third point, which is fundamentally, I think the problem with all of that is that it touches upon their business model. Their business model is based on outrage. And so the question becomes, what is the next business model that they can pivot to? Because unless they change fundamentally the way the algorithm work, and again, the algorithm is at the core of what this platform provide, and that's the core of how they make money. They monetize basically views, like they monetize your interaction with the platform. The more time you spend, the more pages you view, the more they can show you advertising. The more data they collect, the more precise the advertising can be. And so like the algorithm is like the absolute core of their business. And right now, these algorithms are optimized to show you outrageous content. And so I think one of the big problem is that, yes, they're trying. It's too late. It's too little. They need to put significantly more resources, and they need to stop complaining about the fact that it's costly. It's called cost of doing business. The chemical industry doesn't complain as much about the fact that they cannot release chemicals into the atmosphere. I mean, they unfortunately still do it sometimes, but like you don't hear them saying, "Oh, I can't believe." Actually, that's not true. Sorry, scrap that. They do complain about it, but it's part of doing business. So yes, they're doing stuff. Yes, it's costly. Yes, they should be spending even more, and yes, they should stop complaining about it. They should also stop basically lying to our face in saying that they have things under control, because it's not true. And then we need to have a conversation about what is the business model that this company have and should have. Now, to come into Section 230, which was your initial question. So Section 230 is a text it's U.S. based. So it's a section of the U.S. Communications Decency Act, which basically offers protective cover. What it says, and I'm simplifying it, but it basically gives the authorization, or it gives a status to social media platform that they're not technically responsible or legally responsible for anything that users on that platform can write. So there is no accountability. Like if we're going back to Alex Jones, if Alex Jones, which doesn't publish anymore on this platform, but if he was still there and if he was to publish a new conspiracy theory, completely crazy, very, very easily debunkable, like we could prove in a heartbeat that this is completely false, Facebook will still not be responsible for showing that to 15 billion people, or YouTube in that case wouldn't be responsible for showing that to 15 billion people. And so on one hand, this has allowed platforms to grow as fast as they have, because if they had from the beginning to regulate and monitor and really properly moderate all the content, there's no way they would have been able to grow as fast as they have. And so we wouldn't have the communication and information platform that we have right now. And a lot of people who defend Section 230 are basically saying, if you take that out, we're going to have a problem, because these platforms are going to stop operating, or they're not going to be able to operate the way they have operated. And so that comes down to the question of, would the world be a better place without Facebook and YouTube? But at the same time, Section 230 is 100% should be blamed for allowing platforms to profit from toxic speech. Because as we've spent quite a bit of time on, like their whole business model is based on making sure that you see the content that triggers the strongest emotion possible. And so the Section 230 status quo in the United States, while still in place right now, is being heavily debated, especially in the light of the upcoming U.S. election.
Yeah, it acts as a shield and also as a sword, so the platform operator can do whatever he wants without any legal consequences.
Yes, and what's interesting also is that I've started hearing also people saying, "Oh, we can't moderate, because if we were to moderate, then we wouldn't be neutral." And Section 230 was also a way for us to assure that we were neutral. It's like, so first of all, the word neutral is not in the Section 230, so I don't really see the relationship between the two. Second of all, you're not neutral. Like, stop saying that you're neutral, because your recommendation algorithms are by definition biased. Like, we've just spent quite a bit of time on it. Like, they're by definition pushing people towards one thing rather than the other. So this neutrality talking point is completely false. It's just not true. And then third, you're a business that could absolutely have opinions. By the way, you do have opinions. You just conveniently decide to not show them always very publicly, but you absolutely have opinions. And so given that you're a media platform, which by the way, they are also contesting very heavily, but they moderate the content in the sense of like they decide what to show you and what not to show you. They publish content. Like there's no difference between them and a media platform other than they don't have any accountability, which is very convenient for them. But they could. And would that lead to potentially alternatives? Because let's assume that Facebook was starting to moderate very, very strongly a lot of the right-wing content, then yes, maybe a lot of right-wing supporters would feel like Facebook is not what it used to be and would decide to move and create their own platform. Great, let's do that. That's called free market. That's called competitive. That's called competition. We've seen that in the media. You have newspapers which embrace the Democratic Party, and you have newspapers who embrace the Republican Party, and this is okay. And you know which one is what, and you go and read what you feel you need to read based on that. Why would that be different with a social network if the political lens is important to you? And so, yeah, this whole neutrality thing, which somehow get associated to Section 230, needs to be killed. It's just not true.
So here we are with virtually all of us having at least one smartphone, relying on our computers to do our daily actions or purchases or decisions or communications. And yet we are contributing every day into these platforms and helping them to help us or others to target us better and better. What can we do? We are switching to the second part of the book now. Here is a problem, here's the issues, here are the issues. What can we do? How we can fix it, if we can, if we cannot, what can we do to stem it or control it so that it doesn't become a much bigger problem than what already it is? Or are there other technologies on the horizon that can help us to gain or put people back in the power so that the will of the people prevails?
So you're right. The second half of the book is basically about solution. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't just talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I also wanted to say, okay, now that we all align on the fact that there's really some good, some amazing good, but there's also things that clearly could be better and or things that are definitely horrible, and we need to fix them. I wanted to make sure that we would talk about like solution, what can be done. My view is that the same way I explained that the problems are not the responsibility of one person, the solutions aren't either. So it started, and I structured the book in the way that basically every stakeholder, give or take, gets a chapter. So I start talking about the companies themselves because I'm a capitalist and I believe that you need to start with the companies and we need to make them as executives, as employees, we need to make them more empathetic, more human-centered, more responsible, more accountable. And we need to really, really think through the impact that we're having on the world. So I start with the companies themselves, which I think can have a huge role into solving the problem that they themselves created. Then I talk about what the next circle of stakeholder can do, which are the investors, the board members, the stock exchanges. A lot of these companies are actually public company or aspire to be public company. The proxy advisor, which are playing an increasingly important role in advising basically investors, the investment bankers. Then I talk about governments and regulators. I am a firm believer in balanced power. I believe that self-regulation has never worked, and so it's not a belief, it's a fact. If you look at history, there is not a single industry that has been able to self-regulate, and at one point or another, the regulator had to come in and just say, hey, this is how, like, these are the guardrails that you need to operate in. So self-regulation doesn't work. But at the same time, I lived in Russia. I lived in China. I've seen, and I've worked there. I worked in Russia for many years, and I've seen firsthand how a country looks like, how the economy looks like when the government is deeply involved, or was historically deeply involved in the management of the economy. And I don't want that either. I'm very, very clear that this is not the type of society I aspire to continue seeing flourishing in the West. And so when I talk about the regulator and governments in my book, I really talk about what they need to do, in my opinion, from an antitrust perspective, from a tax perspective, from a labor law perspective, from a misinformation, privacy perspective, et cetera, not in terms of let's regulate out big tech and basically kill them, but let's just make sure that our democratically elected governments, people that we put in charge of preserving, again, our values and the type of society we want to live in, let's make sure that these people write the guardrails that big tech companies need to operate in. And I think right now, these guardrails do not exist in sufficient numbers, or they're not strong enough. And so there's a lot to be done around that. And then I talk about the media and then the consumer ultimately, because while the consumers are to some extent the victim of a lot of these big tech companies, they're also responsible for using these tech companies or their products. And I'm not an advocate of let's just stop using them altogether. I do really, really, really understand that it's not possible if you're a professional, for example, to not be using social media in one way or another. Like it's irrealistic to say, oh, I'm going to stop using Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube altogether. It's not, unless you want to be a hermit, that's not going to work. It's if you have a 3-month-old and you buy diapers by the truck, like I get it that you want an Amazon Prime subscription. Like, and I'm not advocating for you to not have it, but I'm also saying there are plenty of alternatives. Like if we talk just about books, like you can go and buy your books on Amazon for sure, and it will be convenient and it's one click. And if you have your Amazon Prime subscription, you don't even think about it. You could also, if you live in the US, you could go and buy it on bookshop.org. It's the same books, it's the same price. Sometimes it's actually a little cheaper. The delivery will probably take a couple of days more, but I would assume that most of us do not feel the need to read the book we order like right in the next 24 hours. and instead, you're helping independent bookstores around the country, because what bookshop.org does is that they leverage the independent bookstore network. So your money goes into the pockets of your local bookstores. Why wouldn't you do that? And so I'm just, again, in the book, I just give a fairly long list of potential alternatives. Again, never arguing to get rid of Amazon or get rid of Apple. I'm basically married to my iPhone. Like I love my iPhone. I'm so grateful that Apple created this beautiful technology. But I also think that there is plenty of things that can be used as alternatives for some of our day-to-day decision. And I'm just advocating for us as users to think a little more about some of the alternative and give up a tiny bit of convenience for a little more independence and competition in the market.
But haven't we all programmed, at least in this culture, that consumption is all we care, and that's all we look for, that's all we live for. And anything that we can get in a very convenient format, even if it costs us our personal information to be shared with some strangers or some strange platform, we don't really care. Doesn't that mean that we need to really educate our population a lot more with the power of the data in the wrong hands, what it can do to your own life?
I think education is important for sure, and the media have been playing an increasingly important role in that. I've seen very clearly a shift from a time where basically, if you were a tech executive, you could do no wrong. You would be on the front page of pretty much any magazine and newspaper at one point or another, being described as a semi-god on Earth. So, and now we're more into a place where the media uncovers fairly regularly some of the worst things that are happening. And the question is, how do you strike the balance, etc. But as the media do that more and more often, it is clear that it helps educating people. I think that when you read an article about yet another data breach and you realize that you use that company, then you start thinking. When you read an article about the working conditions of workers in Amazon warehouses, I think you start thinking a little more, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there are plenty of examples. And so education is important. I think it also starts at school. I think the education system has a massive role to play, educating children about privacy, about the fact that everything that you post online is going to stay there. It's going to be used, not necessarily against you, but it's going to be used in one way or another. And so really educate children, educate business students. Like every year we release into the wild quite a few MBAs. We need to have more conversations with them during their 1 or 2 years at business school around, because they're going to be the leaders of tomorrow. We need to have conversations with them about how do you build an empathetic, human-centered company? How do you build tech that works for people rather than despite people? And obviously, we need to have the same kind of education in computer science classes, because all these engineers who are building the technology of today and tomorrow need to be taught more about EQ and empathy and how to think long-term about the impact that their product will for sure have on humanity. Having said that, I don't think that education is enough. I think education is one of the important steps, and again, definitely needs to happen. But I think it is a little naive to hope that somehow, just by lecturing companies, and the way I'm kind of doing, unfortunately, and by educating people, like somehow magically things are going to change. I am pretty convinced, again, based on facts, based on history, that unfortunately the regulator is going to have to step in or needs to continue to step in much more strongly. And my hope is only, again, based on my experience in Russia and China, is that there's going to be so much done from the companies themselves, from the employees there, from the users to consumers that are using their product and have a voice and have a wallet that they can use, that the regulator actions will be minimized, but I don't believe that they will become completely unnecessary. And so it's about everybody. It's basically about everybody playing their role. It's about company trying to think about how to make money in the best way possible, in a sustainable way, because all these companies want to be around 100 years from now. It's about citizen users / customers exercising their voice and their wallets to support the businesses that are truly not just short-term, but also long-term, contributing to the society we want to live in. It's about the media playing their role of oversight and of telling the truth and talking about what's happening. We need strong media. And it's about governments and regulators playing their role, again, in democratically elected situation, playing their role of preserving, protecting, strengthening the values and the type of society that we want through regulation. And on a positive note, I would say that the West has done a pretty awesome job at it so far, like finding this pretty difficult balance between the four big stakeholders that I'm talking about: business, customers / citizens, media, and government / regulators. Like if you look at the history of the West, especially in the 20th century and now, like we've done pretty good. It hasn't been a walk in the park every day. Like there's been a bump for sure. And sometimes we could have, like, the regulator got a little too aggressive, or sometimes the companies got a little too complacent, or the users focused on consumer on their wallet and just on buying more. And the media just really wrote a few too many nice pieces. So it wasn't perfect all the time, but if you look in hindsight, if you look back, I think we've done a pretty decent job. I think the society that we built together is actually a pretty good one. And all I'm advocating for is that we need to fight really hard for that balance to continue to exist. For the regulator, the media, the users, and the company to all play their role appropriately.
So don't replace it, just fix it and make it better along the way and fine tune it.
Exactly. We don't need less tech. We need more empathetic tech. And to do that, it will take all of us.
Exactly. Thank you. So how did you end up writing this book? What led you to, from the busy, active life of managing large corporations and big teams of people, having to focus on writing a book? What was the inspiration?
It was a very organic process. It wasn't like I didn't decide one day to write a book. I've been passionate about this topic of people and how to put humanity at the center of tech for quite some time. After spending 15 years talking about it all the time and telling people what makes a great company, what makes a great tech company is not a great product. What makes a great tech company are great people. And these great people who care about other people are the ones who will build the great product that you then need to go into the market. And I found myself talking, as I said, more and more about it. I wrote a couple of articles. The first time I wrote something officially was for Wired 6 years ago, where I talked about the fact that I was worried about the increasing power that big tech was starting to accumulate, and the fact that they were not empathetic companies, and that we needed both a gigantic wake-up call of tech leaders and users, but also a deeper thinking beyond just self-regulation, because it was obvious that self-regulation wasn't going to be enough. And then that article led to another, which led to a third, which led to a fourth, and then I started talking about it. And then at some point, a couple of people came to me saying, "Hey, you really have to write a book about it." And I didn't take it very seriously at first. Actually, I didn't take it very seriously. Point. But I met a few more people, and I met someone who is a book publicist who got really excited about my book, and he introduced me. His name is Paul Sleeker. I actually mentioned him in my book. And then he introduced me to a few agents, and I met a woman that I really liked. Her name is Leah Spiro, and she became my agent. And then she was like, "Okay, let's do a proposal." I'm like, "Okay, I'm going to make a proposal." So I wrote a proposal, and then she went and pitched it. And before I knew, I had a few offers from publishing houses. And this is when I was like, "Oh, I guess I'm writing a book."
Thank you. Thank you for being with us and sharing your comments and insights. We have been speaking with Maelle Gavet, the author of Trampled by Unicorns, Big Tech's Empathy Problem and How to Fix It.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.